if you skip like 2 days of not eating, because you haven't done the work and haven't built the metabolic machinery, the brain kind of goes, wait a minute, I'm supposed to get glucose all the time. And you cut off my glucose, what am I going to do? I haven't learned how to burn ketones efficiently yet.
Our ancestors that were most efficient at storing fat, that got fat the easiest, those are the ones that survived.
They survived. They lived long enough to pass the genes along to the next generation. So it's literally, you can argue that, well, people will say, well, I'm fat because my parents were fat and I inherited that gene. Well, good for you, because if you go back far enough, that's the line of survivors, and everyone else kind of died out.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just amazing. And the amount of energy that we can store in our fat, that for people to not be metabolically flexible, it's like, you're undermining millennia of adaptation and evolution and natural selection. I mean, I'm just going to do some math out loud. So you can store about 500 grams of carbohydrates in your body. That's it, right? Like about 100 in your liver, 400 in your muscles. So that's like multiplied by 4, that's 2,000 calories. You can store 2,000 calories of sugar, in your body. But you store 3,000 calories in just a single pound of fat.
Right. Yeah, so I'm 10% body fat, and I'm 170 pounds. So I have 17 pounds of fat. So let's say some of that fat is necessary for other functions beyond fuel and combustion. So if I have 12 pounds of fat on me, times 3,000 calories per pound, that is, 36,000 calories worth. That's enough for me to walk 360 miles without eating.
Wow.
And without suffering the consequences, provided that I'm metabolically flexible. Now, here's where it gets really kind of dicey. For people who haven't done the work to become metabolically flexible, they're still at the effect of this carbohydrate dependency. So if I go 3 days without eating, because I've done the work and I'm metabolically flexible, as I said, my body really doesn't even know that I'm getting the energy from my body's fat stores, and it doesn't care. And it doesn't. There's no ill effects from it. I still, because I'm making ketones, my brain is happy because of the ketones. I'm burning fat to do most of the work. That fat's already on me, and I have a lot of it, as we just described, even at a low body fat. One of the closed loop system concepts that happens as a result of not eating for days, if you're metabolically flexible, is that certain genes are turned on that spare amino acids and spare protein. So you literally recycle proteins much more efficiently, so you don't even need an external supply of protein during this time. So if you're metabolically flexible, you won't even lose much in the way of muscle mass if you go days without eating. Now, the converse of that is if you're carb dependent and you skip one meal, you get hangry and you get out of sorts. And if you skip like 2 days of not eating, because you haven't done the work and haven't built the metabolic machinery, the brain kind of goes, wait a minute, I'm supposed to get glucose all the time. And you cut off my glucose, what am I going to do? I haven't learned how to burn ketones efficiently yet. And so the liver's pumping out these ketones, and you're spilling them out in your breath and your urine and your blood. And dude, I'm in ketosis. I'm 5 millimolar. I'm 6 millimolar. It doesn't matter. If you haven't done the work yet to do that, you're sort of wasting that precious fuel. So when you when you don't eat and you're a carbohydrate dependent person, and the body still thinks it needs carbs to run on and glucose to run on, then the brain sends a signal to the adrenals. The adrenals secrete cortisol, a stress hormone. And you've maybe heard this when people do inappropriate fasts and they haven't prepared for the fast yet, and their cortisol levels go up. Well, cortisol basically tears down muscle tissue throughout the body, sends it to the liver so that it can be made into glucose to fuel the brain and to do these activities. So you're literally cannibalizing your own body in a way that if you're metabolically flexible, not even an issue. But if you haven't built this metabolic flexibility, that's why you get into problems with carb-dependent people doing 3-day fasts and 4-day fasts.
And it's interesting because it's a lot easier, and correct me if I'm wrong, to create glucose from protein than it is from fat, because it's not as efficient, right? Because in fat you can get the glycerol off of the triglyceride.
Right. And so in the model that I talked about, where if I were to go 3 days without eating, or our buddy Peter Attia, which he does routinely, he does 5-day fast all the time. You can say this is such an efficient system because the triglyceride, that is the fat molecule that's being combusted, those 3 fatty acid molecules, they get combusted. Some get sent to the liver to become ketones, which is a fuel that the brain can use. But the glycerol can be used in the manufacture of whatever small amount of glucose is still required. So you can go days without any glucose at all, and the body will make glucose from that glycerol and won't need to cannibalize muscle tissue the way it would in somebody who is not fat adapted and keto adapted.
Wow. There's the whole notion of like fat oxidation versus fat loss, I think sometimes comes up in like the fitness community, the sort of evidence-based, using air quotes, fitness community that's very calorie, they tend to be very calorie focused. So what's the distinction between fat oxidation, which is like the burning of fat, and fat loss for people? Is there a difference?
No, I mean you have to oxidize the fat in order to burn it, in order to lose it. We talk a lot about endurance athletics and the idea that the better you are at burning fat, the longer you can go in terms of endurance athletics. And so I was a marathon runner in the 70s, and I was a triathlete in the 80s, did Ironman a couple of times. And the idea there was, as you said, if you only have 2,000 calories worth of glycogen in your muscles, and by the way, that's 1,600 in your muscles and 100 in your liver. So it's even fewer available to the working muscles, because the liver glycogen is pretty much reserved for the brain, or more essential activities than locomotion. So the idea has always been to be as good at burning fat as you possibly could. But the assumption was that it was still going to be about carbohydrate management. So when in the 70s and 80s and even 90s, when I was competing and coaching, those were the years, the decades of carbo loading. So you always went out and carbo loaded. You overloaded on carbs because the recognition was that you're going to burn through them and you're going to need more of them immediately. If you were training, it was carbo loading every single day, because you're going to go out and run 15 miles today and 20 tomorrow and 10 the next day. And there was never really much attention paid to becoming really, truly fat adapted in keto. In the last decade, a number of athletes have done really well with this ketogenic training and becoming so good at burning fat that they can run literally 6-minute miles, getting 97% of all that caloric requirement from fat and not having to dip into their glycogen stores so much.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is being in keto, is keto like a sort of calorie restriction mimetic? And if so, I guess my question would be like, for an endurance athlete who's chronically in ketosis, wouldn't that be like a stress on the body?
Yeah, it's definitely a stress, and I think you'll find a lot of a stress for an endurance athlete, because an endurance athlete is doing something that is not a particularly smart thing to do for humans, and that is to run at the highest possible output for the longest possible time. Historically, humans are designed to conserve energy and to not want to work that hard and to not want to run that long. If you go back, 10,000 years and you suggest, hey, let's go for a 10-mile run, and your buddy says, well, what are we hunting? And you said, no, we're just going to go out for fun and get a workout.
Yeah.
He would go, you're crazy.
You're insane.
That's a life-threatening activity. So the idea of endurance competition and endurance performance now is so antithetical to human health that you kind of, again, have to you kind of put the component parts together and you say, well, if you're going to do this, then here's how you can do it with the least amount of damage. If you're going to do this, I'm going to train you to be metabolically flexible. So I'm going to use a ketogenic diet for some of that. I'm not going to do it all the time. And so a lot of the guys who are the top keto performers, they don't spend the whole time in ketosis. In fact, it's not wise for them to do that. They develop this metabolic flexibility through either ketogenic dieting or time-restricted feeding or a combination of the two or some amount of fasting. And they literally train the body to build more of these enzyme systems, more of these mitochondria, and kind of upregulate all of that fat-burning capacity. And then having said that, they don't lose their ability to burn carbs. They don't lose their ability to burn glucose or glycogen. So at any point in time, they can top off their glycogen stores. And that's really what they do when they race. It's a combination of fat-dominant energy systems, but also supplemented with some amount of carbs if it gets to that. And now you're just trying to find where that fine line is, where you don't hit the wall and have to drop out of the race.
Yeah, because you never lose the ability to use glucose.
Right.
You just enhance your ability to burn fat.
Exactly.
But that ability to burn glucose when you need it is always going to be there.
No, it's, if you tell me, well, I went to a birthday party last night and I had, a piece of cake and I feel like crap. Well, why do you feel like crap? First of all, if you're metabolically flexible, it'll just get, stored as glycogen.
Yeah.
And if it's an issue for you, go give me 50 air squats and we'll handle that right away.
Yeah.
But I get a little bit frustrated with the keto community who spends so much time measuring and just sort of determining how good they are at keto, that, you hear stories of people who say, well, I've been keto for 2 months, but then I had a day or two where I had 80 grams of carbs and I got kicked out of ketosis. I'm like, okay, what does that look like? Well, I felt like crap and I couldn't move for 2 days. And I'm like, well, that's you were out of ketosis, but you're not metabolically flexible yet, because the point here is to always feel good and to not really think about like what gustatory mistake you just made and have to rethink it or feel guilty about it, because you're metabolically flexible enough to just move on to the next thing and you've got access to these different substrates.
So is getting metabolically flexible just a combination of fasting and being in ketosis for a certain period of time before which you can then...
After which, yeah, sure. I mean, it's a tool. I think keto is a strategy, a tool in a toolbox. The more time you can be keto, the more refined you can be. The better an edge you can put on your metabolic flexibility. Some people spend a lot of time in keto. I'm in and out all the time. Some days I'm keto for 4 days in a row, and other days I might have 175 or 225 grams of carbs if I look back on the day.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's not just the macro element of my diet. It's not just the fat and the fats and protein and lack of carbohydrate. It's often my choice of when I eat. Some days I go dinner to dinner without eating, and some days when I have lunch, I'm like, Jesus, I really didn't even lunch. I didn't need lunch. It's more a habit than anything else. I could easily go dinner to dinner to dinner, and that's one of the sort of realizations you come to when you become metabolically flexible is we eat too damn much food. I mean, all of us do. And even those of us who can get away with it. And that's the other, there are a lot of people who don't ostensibly gain weight and look like they're at the effect of their food choices, but who are probably not as healthy as they could be if they took a real good hard look at what's going on the inside.
Would you say that hunger then is like a sign of metabolic inflexibility?
Yeah, I would. To a point, obviously. I mean, there's a point at which you can go only so long, and the body says, "Hey, dude, you got to eat."
Yeah.
I mean,
it's
like you and I talked about. The cold plunge.
Yeah.
The cold plunge. You can get in that water for 10 seconds or 15 seconds, and it's brisk, and you can get out. Whew, that was wonderful. But then, as you start to challenge yourself and see how long you can stay in, 4 minutes and 5 minutes and 7 minutes, at some point it's no longer a beneficial hormetic experience. Now it's just now you're just having a contest with your, to see, it's a long ball contest basically about, how long, and that's one of the reasons I like the cold, because it's a mind game, but you have to be careful about where you set that limit, and it ceases being a good, positive, hormetic, beneficial experience, and now becomes something that could actually put you over the edge.
Yeah,
and that's possible in eating too. I mean, you can go. I have friends who do 4 and 5 day fasts a lot, and I'm like, I think that's too much. I'm not.
To me, it's a little disordered. I'm not an expert in eating disorders.
No, but that's what I'm saying. So, a 5 day fast or 6 day fast, once a year as a, some sort of homage to your diet and some whatever, that's great. But there's a point at which these become, as you said, disordered. So that's probably, I think, what I try to teach more than anything else with the Primal Blueprint, with Mark's Daily Apple, with the Keto Reset Diet, is this notion of intuitive eating. Like, there's a point beyond which you will not get greater returns. And sometimes there's a point beyond which it'll start to diminish and you'll lose some of the benefits. So I want you to understand enough about how your body works that you can do some work, you can build some metabolic flexibility, and then just freaking enjoy your life and enjoy every bite of food you ever eat and appreciate it for what it is, and experience the world, and don't get so caught up in the hacking and the measuring and the challenges of all this. And that's really been my kind of my mantra for the company is live awesome, right? And that's really what at the end of the day, that's what we all want to do. We all want to get the greatest amount of pleasure and fulfillment and contentment and enjoyment out of whatever moments we can. And to the extent that I'm struggling through another 4 day fast and trying to stay on this track of perfect eating, that doesn't fit the model of an awesome life in my book.
Yeah, I agree with that. People always ask me if I've ever done any extended fasts, like more than a 24-hour, maybe a 30. I feel like the most I've ever done is a 36-hour fast. But people have asked me if I've ever done any of these like 3, 4 day, 5 day fasts, and my answer is no. And I'm just like, and they ask me why, and I'm like, well, why would I want to do that? I don't have any need to. I'm at a body composition that I'm happy with. My labs are always generally pretty good. So
no, I mean, other than a personal challenge to see if you could do it. Look, I did 50 marathons, and I've spent the last 2 decades trying to convince people not to do marathons because they're bad for you.
Wow.
So there's a point at which I will say, if you want to do a marathon, I'll coach you how to do a marathon. And we'll get through this. And actually, I'll let people do 2 marathons. I'll let you do 1 to see if you can finish. And if you liked it and you think you can go faster, I'll let you do 1 more. And if you do that 1 more and you're a man and you haven't broken 3 hours, or you're a woman and you haven't done 3:30, I'm like, find a new sport. This is not for you. All this is going to do is just beat you up.
And just before we close the loop on metabolic flexibility, so would you say it's like about 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks? Like, what is that like induction period like? Like, how long does that take?
2 to 4 weeks is a good number. In my book, The Keto Reset Diet, it's basically a 6-week program. But it's 6 weeks, kind of like once a year. It's a reset, and which isn't to say that you go off the wagon after 6 weeks. What it means is you're pretty strict about the keto part of it for 6 weeks, but then the occasional meal that has some starchy tubers or some rice or something in it isn't going to derail you. It's going to be part of that whole metabolic flexibility thing. And as long as you do that in concert with an eating strategy that has you, I do believe that a time restricted window for eating is optimal. So I usually eat 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's my first meal, and then I'll eat dinner. And last night it was like the blue plate special for a bunch of old people. We met at 6 o'clock at this restaurant, but that's great. It was, and I am old, so that I can talk about that. But but basically, the longer you go in a day without eating, the more good stuff happens in your body.
I like that, and I would agree with that. I had my first meal at noon today. Sometimes I have it at like 11, a.m., but like noon today, and then I try to kind of wrap things up by like 8 or 9 p.m.
Yeah.
Doesn't always happen. But I give myself between like minimum 12 hours, but between 12 and 16 hours every day where I'm not eating.
I think in our community, over the past decade, one sort of common theme is that people are just realizing that breakfast is like A, a waste of time, B, not necessary,
Yeah.
C, again, too much food.
I just think if you wake up starving, there's something.
You're not metabolically flexible. That's
Yeah.
clear. If you wake up starving, then have breakfast. But if you start to eat the right kind of foods for breakfast, or avoid even more so the wrong kinds of food for breakfast. I mean, you look at the typical American breakfast. It's cornflakes, it's or oatmeal and orange juice and toast with jam. It's like a sugar fest.
What's a Mark Sisson breakfast?
Well,
like the
so I
meal
don't-
that you break your fast with.
Oh, well, I will break a fast with, an omelet at 1 o'clock or 1:30 or 2. Today, I ate at 2 o'clock today, and I had a burger without a bun. And literally, a burger without a bun, that was it, full stop. It's all I need. So one of the things that you also start to realize is not only are 3 meals too much, but sometimes 2 regular meals of what you used to eat are also too much food. So I tend to make my dinner my main meal, partly because it's a social thing. There's a point at which I want to sit down with people and eat and discuss and enjoy and have a glass of wine, and so that's kind of my ceremonial, nice meal. And it's no bigger than it would have been. It's no bigger because it's the only meal. If that's the case, it's still a piece of steak, some grilled vegetables, maybe some cheese, and a glass of wine. But I've recognized over the past 5 years that I've cut my total calories back 30%, 35% from what they were 5 or 6 years ago. And same body fat, same strength levels, same energy levels. So it's a real eye opener. I did a thought experiment a bunch of years ago, where we tend as humans to see what we can get away with, right? So, your employees at work tend to see how little work they can do and still get paid. Not you guys listening, but and with food, we tend to see how much food we can eat and not get fat or gain weight or feel guilty or feel like or whatever, get sick. But it really pushes up to the edge for a lot of people. It's like that's kind of the finish your plate thing. God bless Cheesecake Factory for their giant portions.
Oh,
and,
man.
But what it does is it tends to have people be okay with overeating, because they just tend to. It's like they see what they can get away with. So a bunch of years ago, I thought, would be really interesting is to see not what's the most amount I can eat, and not gain weight, but what's the least amount I can eat and maintain muscle mass, still have all the energy I need, never get sick, and most importantly, not be hungry, because that hunger just ruins everything.
Yeah.
And if you can consciously kind of go back and say, what's the least amount of this meal I can eat and not be hungry later on, you find that it's a demonstrably smaller amount of food than what you used to think you could get away with and not gain weight.
Wow, so interesting. Yeah, I tend to wake up and I like when I have my first meal around 11 or noon, it always tends to be very protein rich. I'm not big on I don't use a lot of added fats or oils. I'll use extra virgin olive oil, which I'm a huge fan of, a tablespoon, 2 tablespoons max. And then generally I'll snack throughout the day. Well, I don't snack throughout the day, but if I do choose to snack, it'll be, I'll tend to reach for protein, protein rich foods.
Yep.
And then I have my big dinner meal,
Yep.
One thing I've wondered about you, so on the spectrum of fully plant-based, fully carnivore, where does Mark Sisson sit on that continuum?
So I used to be in the middle, and now I'm more toward carnivore. So I've really been intrigued by the work of Paul Saladino, Sean Baker, a number of these people who are MDs and researchers in this field. And every time I try to poke a hole in their argument, I get a pretty decent response about, not only do we not need to eat nearly as much in the way of vegetable matter and fruit. But for some people, that amount of vegetables is, again, antithetical to health, whether it's nightshades, whether it's oxalates, whether it's what we would assume to be beneficial antioxidants are actually, in fact, plant defenses against us, and they're manifesting themselves in some gut irritation with certain people. And the reason I still continue to eat plants is I want to have the widest variety of food in my diet. I just like broccoli with butter on it. I like Brussels sprouts. I like green peas. I mean, and so I'm not going to not eat them anymore. My fear, not just for me, but for people that are following me, is that their diet will become too boring. And again, I want life to be exciting. I want every bite of food that I eat to taste great. Last night at dinner, I had a burrata salad. I had that piece of burrata, and it came with peaches, and that was like a novel concept for me. So I had a couple of peaches. I mean, that's not. Yes, peaches are full of sugar, but I mean, in the context of that and that New York steak that I had, and you had that 2-pound ribeye.
Oh, it was so good.
Yeah,
so good.
Yeah.
What was the name of that restaurant again?
Draycott.
Draycott. Shout out to Draycott in Pacific Palisades. Really good ribeye. That's interesting. Yeah, I tend to I like plants, but I also definitely prioritize like the protein, the meat, the fish, the eggs, things like that.
One thing that I see in the keto community is a tendency to add extra fat. So you were talking a little bit earlier about olive oil and the tablespoon here or there. And I see this a lot in early keto adopters, particularly people who are tremendously overweight and then went to keto because they were sort of given permission to have bacon and butter and fat and lard and cheese. And one of the dangers, not a danger, but one of the reasons that they maybe plateau at some point is they're still thinking about this being a fat-centric diet, the keto diet being fat-centric, and it's not so much that as it's a carb deficient diet. It's not that you have to add back a ton of fat. It's that you have to really cut the carbs. And another sort of I think erroneous assumption was that too much protein will convert to glucose and kick you out of ketosis. Well, it takes a fair amount of protein to do that, and if people are having 150 or 160 grams of protein a day, that's not too much, especially if you're a large person who's got a lot of fat to burn. So the notion that you would then want to add in more fat so that the ratios, came back into range, what it does is you become good at burning fat. You're just not burning off your own body fat.
You're not burning off your own fat.
Yeah.
I think that's a crucial distinction that you made, that the ketone fire hose is not a function of added fat in your diet or any fat in your diet. It's purely a function of the deficit of exogenous glucose, i.e.,
mostly in form of carbs. Yeah.
Yes.
But you're right, exogenous glucose, because it's glucose is what raises insulin, and insulin shuts off ketosis. So you can accomplish this. You could be a vegetarian and get into ketosis, and you can get into ketosis with caloric restriction versus just macronutrient manipulation.
Yeah.
But the easiest way is to have a low carb diet that's adequate in protein and then is not too over the top in terms of fat. The 2 meals a day, which is the name of my most recent book, really has become kind of a way of life for me. So I don't eat until 1 or 1:30. I don't feel compelled to. I'm not hungry. It just fits perfectly with my lifestyle. So I'll have a lunch, kind of a smallish lunch, and then a very enjoyable dinner. But again, not overdoing it, just enough to satisfy. I noticed that if I was on vacation, but I have to admit, I'm always on vacation now. So, but I happen to be on vacation.
Don't rub it in, Mark.
In France, and I had desserts and I had bread and but not overboard. right? Just enough to kind of, taste, get that sensation in a couple of bites, and then say, okay, I got it. And I notice the difference, on occasion. I mean, there'll be a night when I've come back from dinner and I don't sleep as well, and I know it's because of something I had to eat. So good news, bad news. When you clean up your diet, everything falls into place. The bad news is if you go off, you really notice it, right? You really feel the difference. So, diet as an anti-aging strategy, diet is still the primary driver of a lot of what we do.
Now, do you think about is your focus primarily at this point food quality, or are macros a consideration? Are you trying to be in ketosis, for example?
Good point. I'm not trying to be in ketosis. I sort of have keto days because, I have a piece of fish for lunch and a vegetable, and a piece of steak for dinner and a vegetable and a glass of wine. And that's my day's, allotment. And that's a very keto day. I don't have a lot of days where my carbs will be up to over 100. But if they are, because of metabolic flexibility, I don't feel drag ass because I had carbs and now I'm feeling like I need to take a nap. That doesn't really happen to me. What I said about eating dinner or a dessert is more of a immediate response to blood sugar and things like that, I don't sleep as well. But, if it were during the day or the next day, I wouldn't be dragging because I got kicked out of keto, for instance, which is a line I used to hear from a lot of people who are, all keto all the time. And when they went off and when they'd have 120 grams of carbs, they'd feel like crap. Well, that's not metabolic flexibility. That's just an allegiance to keto that didn't really correct a lot of the problems that were going on. So I'm keto-ish, and but almost by just the nature of the choices I make. It's not like I'm purposely trying to be keto. I'm just, because I know to eliminate certain things that don't serve me well, and I know to include other things. Protein becomes the big driver of everything. Like as long as I can focus on protein for the day, I almost don't care what the other macros are. And again, as my philosophy has evolved over the years, there was a time when I was an adherent of Ron Rosedale, who would say, "Oh my God, anything over 40 grams of protein a day, and you're gonna, mTOR is going to come into play, and it's a precancerous sort of route, and it's an aging strategy, not an anti-aging strategy." Past that. I think we've decided that, all these things like mTOR play a positive role for the most part, and we want to promote mTOR to a certain extent because that's, muscle growth, and certainly if you're, under 20 years old, you want a lot of that. So I look now at protein being sort of the main driver. Like if and it's not just the main driver of as the preeminent macro, because the body can pretty much do anything with amino acids, with protein, right? You can do gluconeogenesis, and you can make glucose. Most of the sources of protein have fat, alongside a company, so you're going to get fat with that anyway. So there is a rationale behind a carnivore diet that says, you really don't need a lot of extra. You certainly don't need any extra macronutrients if you're eating carnivore, and you probably don't need that much in the way of micronutrients if you're eating carnivore. So using protein as the primary driver, and protein being the most satisfying and, in my world, tasty choice of food, it makes eating really easy, and it's almost like too easy. Like you go to a restaurant, and I'm going to have a steak or lamb or even a pork chop. I don't eat so much chicken, but a fair amount of fish, shellfish, shrimp. I mean, it's a great way to live. It's not inexpensive if you're dining out a lot, but if you're eating at home, it's a way to make that work for sure.
Yeah, not everybody's Mark Sisson, okay?
No. But I mean, I have a lot of friends who will eat 4 pounds of ground beef a day.
Oh yeah, there is a way to optimize for protein.
And love it, yeah, and love it
economically.
And think, and some of the best meals I have are when my wife will cook like a shepherd's pie or something like that. So, I'm not. It's just,
yeah.
In Miami, the tendency is to dine out a fair amount.
Yeah, I mean, if you're living in Miami and you're not eating out on a regular basis, you're kind of like, what are you doing?
What's the point?
Yeah. No, you're so right.
Yeah.
But I love that you're not dogmatically keto. You know, I think it's just a testament to when when you're a person who's as active as you are, and you're probably living in some state of, glycogen depletion
Yeah.
at any given point, and it just gives you a much higher leeway to consume carbohydrates. And then inevitably you're going to oscillate in and out of ketosis just because of that.
Yeah. And what happens is, as you develop metabolic flexibility over the years, your body doesn't want to be in ketosis. Ketosis is a term that describes an excess of ketones in the bloodstream. It's basically the osis part of it means it's not really desirable.
Yeah.
You don't want to be in ketosis. You want to be making ketones, but you don't want to overproduce them. And as your body gets more and more metabolically flexible, it learns how many ketones to make.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is the liver can make 750 calories a day worth of ketones. And most of these ketones go to fuel the brain. Well, the brain's daily requirement for energy is rarely above 500 calories a day, between 500 and 600 calories a day. So call it 20 to 24 calories per hour. And because the brain has a steady state consumption of fuel, it doesn't go up and down with wide swings. If you become keto adapted and fat adapted and metabolically flexible, the liver just goes, I'm just going to pump out 20 calories worth of ketones every hour. It's easy. And I've got access to body fat. And I know how to take the fat out of storage. So it becomes, so a lot of guys who've been like keto for 10 years are almost rarely in ketosis as defined by 0.5 millimolar or higher.
What about for listeners who are wondering, like, what's the point? Like, what is the point anyway of wanting to see an elevation of ketones? Isn't it all just like calories in, calories out? Is there an anti-aging argument to be made for this intermittent dalliance with ketosis?
Well, I think ketosis is more of a 3-week, program to embark on as a strategy to help develop metabolic flexibility. But once you develop the metabolic flexibility, then the benefits of being in ketosis all the time start to diminish. You don't need to be in ketosis all the time, because if you're metabolically flexible, your body gets energy from whatever substrate's available and doesn't care. And then because of your selectivity with the types of food you eat, you almost selectively get rid of sugars, sweetened beverages, processed carbs. And if you're eating just real food, it's basically meat, fish, fowl, eggs, nuts, seeds, which are all fat and protein, vegetables, which are free carbs for the most part. You can eat as many vegetables as you want, and some fruit. And the fruit, because it's mostly fructose, doesn't have the same effect on insulin. So you don't get the wild insulin swings from eating fruit that you normally would from eating sugar or from eating bread, pasta, rice, cereal, all that stuff. So it's kind of a self-selecting mechanism where there's a point at which if you eliminate those offensive foods, you don't even have to think about it. If this is your choice of what you're going to eat, you don't count the macros that way. You don't count the grams of carbs or the net carbs. You just eat.
Yeah, it's like if your goal is to be able to have a way of eating that allows for rice or bread or sandwiches or wraps or bowls of pasta as your primary foods, then you're going to have to create some kind of budget for yourself, because it's just so easy to overindulge on those foods. But if you remove them, I think it makes a really great, it just makes them a lot more effortless to.
And it does. And I will tell you that I had an amazing bowl of pasta a couple nights ago. I knew what I was doing, didn't think twice about it, didn't, guilt myself over the carb content, just knew it was going to be great. And it was gluten-free, and it was, a creamy sauce, and it was wonderful. I don't need to do that every night. I don't need to do that, more than once in a while. But I also like to eat. I love a variety of food. I don't want to deprive myself, which is also why some nights, again, if I'm in a great restaurant, I've got this great yeasty bread that's making its rounds on the table. I'll take a chunk of it and some butter and and enjoy, with reckless abandon.
When a client presents to you, actor, musician, whatever, and they've got to get in shape fast, like walk me through the process.
So depending on if they're trying to lose body fat or look gaunt, like, Jesus in the Passion had to look gaunt. Another client we worked with was playing a caveman, had to look gaunt. Someone else had to put on muscle mass. Putting on muscle mass takes way more time than losing weight. And also depends on what the person currently looks like and how long they currently look like that. So if they used to be an athlete and they kind of gained a bunch of weight, it's not so difficult to get them back to that. If this person's never had muscle mass on them, all of a sudden you're like, oh gosh, this is going to be a challenge. But if they're within striking distance, as fast as 5-6 weeks, you can make a tremendous difference,
Yeah. Because putting on muscle for somebody that's already at one point had a good bit of muscle, you benefit from what? Muscle memory, right?
Exactly. Or if there's someone who had a kid and gained weight from the pregnancy and I had to get them to lose it, that's different because they only had gained weight for 9 months or so. So getting them,
Nutritionally, I think there's this perhaps misconception that everybody in Hollywood, they go on these like crash diets. Is that an approach that you take?
No.
Or is it a more sort of moderate?
When I started my business, an actor would come to me and they're like, I need to look a certain way by a certain date.
Yeah.
And I would shackle them to the elliptical or treadmill for an hour before our workouts 5 days a week, and do these exhaustive long workouts, and then keep them after for a cardio cool down and put them on a super strict diet. And it worked. And then after that scene was shot, or after that month of scenes were being done shot, I wouldn't hear from that person for a year and a half.
Wow.
And things are different today because digital media exists 365 days a year. So if that person looks great and then has to go do some interview somewhere, or someone's grocery shopping and sees them at 50 pounds heavier, they'll take a picture and post it and they lose an endorsement. And so today there's this need to be moderate, to have balance, to approach things with a real sustainable way.
Yeah. But like somebody coming to you wanting to put on muscle quickly, they just booked the latest Avengers movie. They got to pack on some meat. What are nutritionally and from an exercise standpoint, what are you prioritizing?
Both. Meaning they're both essential. It's like when you have a flower, do you need air or do you need water or sun? You need them all. So without one, it just won't work.
Right.
So if they're putting on muscle mass, I would do probably 4 to 5 days a week of resistance exercise, keeping their heart rate below a certain amount. The workouts will be slower, less about high intensity. The food is a massive part of it. I probably wouldn't have them doing too much cardiovascular activity. And it doesn't work for everybody. It's more important to look muscular on camera than be muscular.
Interesting.
So if you look at Jean-Claude Van Damme at any of his early movies, Bloodsport or any of those, I think he was 130 pounds or 140 pounds.
That's it?
Yeah. The little guy.
Wow.
So on camera, definition shows bigger muscles than bigger muscles without definition show on camera. So on camera, I don't look as muscular as someone 50 pounds lighter than me. And so proportion is another thing. So if you're out of whack and you're all anterior dominant, you don't look as good on camera as if you have a little more balance to your physique.
That's so interesting.
And I hate to say it, but most of these people, like Brad Pitt, his legs were like sticks back. When people talk about his physique back in the day, it was all upper. A lot of these guys are all upper body.
Dude, Brad Pitt's body in Fight Club, that was like the platonic ideal for like what I think many men,
and Troy,
including myself,
and Troy,
he got a little bigger for Troy, didn't he?
He did. He got bigger for Troy, but he's a little dude in
right, like in a t-shirt, he'd be like a skinny guy.
He's like a little dude. So I think if you take anyone who has some muscle, not even a lot, and you get them really lean, they appear really muscular. So that Bruce Lee, I think was 130 pounds.
Wow,
he was a tiny dude, but he could see every muscle flex when he moved.
I think there's this perception though that like people in Hollywood have some kind of like magic formula, but what's shocking about what you're saying is that it's not magic.
No,
it's just
motivation.
It's motivation, discipline.
Yep.
And the same tools that's what I think is so empowering here is that they're utilizing the same tools that we have access to.
100%. There's no secret exercise. There's no secret machine. They're using dumbbells and a bench and a TRX, and they're not using any special equipment. So if you read about it, it's not a thing. And they're not getting any special foods that you don't have access to. So yeah, it's really attainable. And the workouts are not overly long because Hallie, the first book was called 5 Factor Fitness because the workouts were 5 days a week. It was during her lunch, which only is 30 minutes long on a film set in Quebec. We were shooting Gothica at the time, so it was on Montreal. And so she had to be back in her trailer in under 30 minutes. We had 25 minutes. So we did, 5-minute cardio warm up and then a 5-minute upper body, 5-minute lower body, 5-minute abs, 5-minute cardio cool down, done.
Wow.
And that was how we transformed her.
So quick.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Speaking of exercises and anterior dominance, you on Instagram, you've taken a controversial stance on 2 exercises that I do pretty well. One of them I used to do pretty regularly, and then the other one I still do pretty regularly. Battle ropes and planks. Mm-hmm. You're not a fan.
You mean an isometric plank? You just stay there in the plank position?
Yeah.
Battle ropes, for sure not.
You're not a fan. I used to love battle ropes.
Yeah.
And then I kind of started to feel a little bit of what I read you say about them. But explain to my audience why battle ropes can be problematic.
Well, I always like to flip it back when someone's telling me they do an exercise and they love it. I'll say, rather than me telling you why you shouldn't do it, tell me why you should do it. What does that exercise do for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought it was a great high intensity. It was like a fun and novel way of doing a little bit of anaerobic work at the end of my workouts, a little bit of like HIIT training.
Okay. So it's a way to get your heart rate up.
Yeah.
Okay. And how long at any one time would you do it for?
I would do it for 30 to 40 seconds all out. And I would do like 3 or 4 sets.
And do you think it's more lower body or upper body you're using?
I found that it was more upper body.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mainly upper body.
Yeah.
And of the body parts that are mainly being used, what do you think are being used the most?
Probably your core, your shoulders, your chest, your anterior deltoids.
But not chest.
You're not your chest.
No.
Huh. Your arms.
Watch my neck.
Traps.
So you're doing a lot of things. You're putting a lot of force on your shoulders, on your levator scapula, on your trapezius, on all these things that you're lifting yourself up with. Your brachioradialis, your bicep, but not in a way where you're actually getting full extension, full contraction of anything. You're just sort of this partial tight.
Yeah.
Holding your breath. It's horrible. Look, if someone does it and it brings them joy and it doesn't hurt them, no one has to stop doing it. It's not, stop now or you're going to end up in the hospital at all. I just find that these exercises, really no one talked about them before Instagram. And I think there's a lot of exercises that I call fitness porn that you see on Instagram because they look great. So whenever I do a photo shoot for, whether it be Aloe or, some other company, they're always like, okay, we need to film this. We need movement in the shot.
Yeah,
can you use ropes? Because it photographs really well, which it does. The most effective exercises might not photograph well. Jogging in place, just not, it doesn't look very good.
Right.
So I'm not a big fan of that. Secondly, HIIT training, I think, is extraordinarily overdone. I think the research on HIIT training is sort of grasping for straws.
Interesting.
Keeping in mind who America is. The majority of America is deconditioned and overweight. HIIT training is the worst thing they should ever be doing.
Why is that?
If you're deconditioned and overweight, doing high intensity training is not going to help you lose weight in a safe, sustainable way. Number one, there's the rate of perceived exertion. Humans naturally avoid things that feel difficult. So if you can do something that, hey, that's not bad. I like that. That wasn't too bad. You'll do it more often and you'll do it more frequently and for longer. So it's got a high rate of perceived exertion. Secondly, things that are high intensity tend to have a higher injury occurrence. You're moving at a faster pace. Thirdly, your cardiovascular system is going to be the limiting factor in your ability to sustain, not the muscles you're trying to train. So I try and tell people there's 2 kinds of physical activity. There's steps or aerobic, and there's resistance training to strengthen, tone, and tighten your muscles and your connective tissue and your bones, your body. They're different. You can combine them, but it's the Swiss Army knife thing. The Swiss Army knife has a toothpick, but it sucks, and it has scissors, but it can't cut anything.
Right.
So even though it does a lot of things, it doesn't do either one incredibly well.
Right.
So I tell people, hit a step goal every day to burn calories and lose weight. Resistance train to tone, tighten, strengthen your body. Resistance training at such a high intensity where your heart rate is through the roof, you have general fatigue rather than local fatigue. I want people to focus more on local fatigue. I want it to be more precision. What's the least you need to do rather than how much you can do? And I think that's the miss on the approach.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. And
again, don't stop. I mean, if people love HIIT training because it's cathartic and there's an endorphin rush that comes with doing super high intensity things, and there's a stress release, and there's so many other intangibles, but from a pure logical perspective on transforming your body, it's not the best way to go about it.
well, it is super intense, but I think the value add, what makes it compelling, at least from a research standpoint, is that, you know, imagine you're able to get the benefits of a 30-minute cardiovascular
Yep.
steady state workout in less time, right? In like a shortened, super high intensity set. So it might be more intense than that moderate intensity bout on the treadmill, but it requires less time. It requires 10 minutes as opposed to 30 minutes, or 5 minutes as opposed to 30 minutes. To me, I think that's like there's a value proposition there that
I was pulling up something. There was 3 new studies that just came out showing that HIIT training research was sort of reaching a bit. And
interesting.
so, people love to find new bits of information that can support or validate something that they're doing. Anything that supports a magic pill, getting more done in less time. People love that stuff.
Yeah.
So there was research showing, one set exercise, back in the day, Darden, that was a lot of his stuff that propelled Nautilus strength equipment. It was single set. And so if you did one set of exercise per body part, that's all you needed to do. And there's a lot of evidence showing that you can have benefits from it. But years later, we look back and we realize it's actually not muscular benefits, it's neurological benefits. So in the increase in strength you're getting is purely neurological, not really muscular. And secondly, you're not really changing the way your body looks. And thirdly, you're not any healthier for it.
Right.
So I think it's important to question this stuff. And again, if someone loves HIIT training and it's great, but what are you doing it for?
Yeah.
What's the number one reason that people exercise for?
Yeah. Probably to look better naked. There you go.
Yep.
Yeah. It's interesting. But battle ropes in particular, I thought it was interesting that you kind of called them out for the fact that it just puts more focus on this anterior. We spend so much of our time sitting and just doing things that are pulling our shoulders forward, texting, typing. Yeah. And so you're doing this battle rope thing, which, I started to feel, because I have low back issues, like persistent. It's way better now than it's been. Shout out to boxing for really helping, get my lower back in shape. But that's just another sport, right? Where you're just like, your shoulders are coming forward.
I tell my clients never to box.
Never to box. Interesting.
Because it's all anterior.
Yeah.
Not only is it anterior, it's trunk rotation. If you have a bad back, you should avoid trunk rotation at any cost, because your discs do this.
Yeah.
Thirdly, you're asymmetrical. So you always have if you're right-handed, your left leading foot. So you're doing things for extended periods of time without balance. So you end up with a dominant posture. Fourthly, there's impact. And so impact over years causes arthritis. As a hockey player, I have arthritis in my hands from punching helmets.
Wow.
Again, don't stop it. If it brings you joy, and I tell people when I give advice, none of these are like, stop right now.
Yeah. Well, I feel that boxing has helped, but I definitely appreciate, there was another post where you said that with your clients, you generally try to get them to sort of overcompensate for this anterior dominance by prioritizing back exercises, that's the first time I've ever heard anybody recommend that, to actually like.
I've never let a female client do push-ups, flies, bench press, dumbbell chest press.
Wow.
We hardly ever do biceps. Almost everything we do for my female clients specifically. Male clients, there's more of a desire to have a muscular chest. So we do chest, but for every bit of pecs we do, we do 2 rhomboid movements. And we, for every bicep we do, maybe we do biceps once a month, but we do triceps every week.
Wow.
And for all of our quad work, we make sure we do 50% more hamstring and glute work.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Just because the front gets so much more work.
Yeah. And just if you never exercised before in your life, just by living life, you're going to be anterior dominant. If you did exercise, you probably, when you started working out, I know when I started working out, it was bench press, bicep curls, and leg extensions.
Yeah.
And crunches, right?
Pretty much.
And so everything's going forward. And so you look at embryological development, when an embryo is a bud, it's like this. And then we spend, the next several years kind of going like this. And then we get back to like this. And then we're like old people like this again. So we want to delay that and kind of go back to Da Vinci's The Eternal Man.
What are some of your favorite back exercises?
An inverted TRX row. I find a TRX allows you to really train your upper back with some intensity.
Those are like the cables or whatever?
Like the yellow strap.
Yeah.
Reverse incline dumbbell row, single arm dumbbell row, reverse cable flies. And then, that all hits upper back, but then lots of glute work and hamstring work and tricep work. And yeah.
Is this also why you're not a fan of the plank?
I don't tell people not to plank, but I think that I prefer an active plank. So it's like when you train your biceps, do you just train them like this?
No, yeah.
When you train your triceps, do you train them like that?
You work them through the full range of motion.
So a plank is only strengthening your rectus abdominis at that one range of motion. So I think that there's to have an active plank, like a pike plank or a spider plank or a twist plank or any other plank where there's actual movement and the abdominals kind of lengthen and shorten a little bit.
Yeah, I like that. I appreciate that.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
I like pizza too, but right, like pizza, and they do studies with this, French fries, donuts. You think about all these things, carbs and fats together is a recipe to induce this low-grade sepsis, which causes people to feel crappy and exacerbate chronic inflammation. So